قامته شلومو ورمشو بريخو اليوم اشتحسر بيرحو تامز قلت لن تحرستو دي لونيتو مع حبرم يقرو ورحو أمريكا يتحرست ايضا بسمين على بوليشونو انجليشويو موقع كبعنو بارويو دم مش غنو بدينو بوليشونو انجليشويو. Hello and welcome everybody to our session. Today we have July 16th, and we have today as a special guest from America, from United States. And I am happy to welcome Richard Ghazal. Welcome.
Thank you, يقرب Abdulmesih. كوبانو دمانو تودي ليز مينوثو بقامتو كوبانو طولبنا شبقونو محا زوي والسوريوي دي لاتيو قميرو إلو كنقا كم جاربنو بس أعدو مشغولين سبوثو عموقي ينقايو راحد مشغلو إنجليزي تودي
شينو ميقمت بدينا كبانو كريويثو مدد حزيلي طبعا بدا فود انترنت على هيدوخ طبعا بروفيشنال دعدت كتت executive director of in defense of Christians شو توسو كتيو تكسوم لوبي advocacy لجنمشي حوي دوشارك and you are responsible for the organization strategic planning, the implementation of policy priorities and advocacy initiatives in the legislative and executive branches of the government. You are also retired U.S. Air Force intelligence officer. Maybe you have to explain what this is. Is it, so have you been a spy or something like that? I don't know. And judge advocate, where you served also as a legal advisor to the Secretary of the Air Force and Special Assistant U.S. Attorney and Federal Criminal Prosecutor. So heavy responsibilities as it looks like. And as an intelligence officer, you were at the U.S. Air Force in Europe, Chief of 11th Political Military Intelligence. You have been also, you commanded over 1,500 mission hours of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So it's called ISR operations. And of course, you completed your Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science and Philosophy at Rhode Island College. And you were a distinguished graduate of the U.S. Air Force Intelligence Official School. And as I understood, you are also an active duty airman. So you had Master of Art degree in organizational leadership at Regent University, and you have Juris Doctorate at New England School of Law. In addition, of course, you have published on different platforms and magazines, the Wall Street Journal, the Hill, Newsweek, and the National Interest and Forbes. Yeah. Anything you want to add to that, maybe?
Thank you. No, that was a good summary. Yeah, I've done quite a few things in my career. And I think all of my experiences in my career, even though apart from the work of our nation, our people, have contributed to the work of our people. And for that, I'm thankful of what I've done in thus far in my life.
Wonderful. Of course, we have to mention you are also active in the community, in the Syriac Orthodox community, and you are Koruyo, a reader in the church, as I understood. Correct?
That's correct, yes.
Welcome. So let's start with the mission of the IDC in defense of Christians. So what does it aim for? How does it want to defend Christians? As far as I understood, it's an advocacy organization, but what's its focus? Is it just on the Middle East or is it worldwide? Maybe you can give us a brief overview on this.
Certainly. Well, I want to rewind the clock back about 11 years to the foundation of In Defense of Christians, IDC. Back in 2014, as you remember, when ISIS was committing genocide against our people and Christians in general in Iraq and in Syria, here in the West, and specifically in the United States, While the media was covering it, it was occupying the headlines in the media because, as we say, if it bleeds, it leads. If it's whenever there's something violent happening, whenever there's something of great spectacle, the media shows great interest. However, in Washington, D.C., the political community, the policy community, didn't really talk much about it. Certainly not with respect to resolution, saving the people who were victims of genocide. So it was in that time period in 2014 when a group of friends came together and formed In Defense of Christians. Now, I wasn't a part of the group at the time. I didn't join IDC until years later. But the initial formation of IDC was not an organization per se. It was a movement. It was an event. They brought together a conference where foreign leaders, U.S. leaders, political leaders, and policy leaders were brought together to discuss the issue. Because nothing could be done to resolve the issue unless it was first recognized as a genocide. And that's exactly what the first accomplishment of IDC was in 2014 and 2015. The U.S. government officially recognized it as a genocide. And it was from that basis where the U.S. government was able to become involved both in a humanitarian way as well as militarily to bring an end to ISIS. Once that success was manifested at the very early stages, IDC then came together as an organization, and we've now just last year commemorated our 10-year anniversary. So to answer your question, IDC's mission, of course, is to advocate here in the U.S. government on behalf of Christians in the Middle East to preserve the threatened Christians of the Middle East and their 2,000-year-old Christian heritage. It covers the Middle East, but in recent years, it's extended past the Middle East. Although we're centrally focused in the Middle East, of course, we also do some advocacy work for Nigeria, the suffering of Christians in Nigeria, and in other places. But our main work is in the Middle East. Currently, Syria is at the foreground. Syria and Iraq, of course, are at the foreground of our advocacy in U.S. government.
I see here the 3 bullets how you accomplish your advocacy mission. Could you elaborate on those?
Certainly, yeah. We spoke mostly about the first prong, the first bullet there, policy and government relations. So we meet with members of Congress almost on a daily basis. In fact, many days we meet with multiple members of Congress to discuss these issues. But with most members of Congress, they don't really have a background because, as you know, any legislature, any parliament, any congressional body is composed of citizens who may not have a background in these matters of foreign affairs or the Middle East. They may be well versed in economics, trade, that sort of things. So our first job, of course, when we meet with members of Congress is to educate them, give them the background. As we say, the phrase we use here in the United States is the 101, right? The basic version, the Middle East Christians 101, and why it matters. So we can teach them about it, but unless they know why it matters for the United States, for U.S. interests, for their local constituencies that elected them, then it doesn't really resonate with them. So that's what we also try to do, tell them why it matters to the U.S. and their constituencies. In addition to that, government relations work, we also do public affairs and media. We publish articles, we release press releases, and that sort of thing. We educate the media as well. Oftentimes, if we're not the person in the byline who published the article, we're often the person behind the scenes educating the journalist, not just educating them, but also focusing their perspective and what they may be looking into. And then finally, of course, the education and training piece really comes about in 2 ways. One is educating on the actual issue, which I mentioned earlier, but also just educating normal people in diaspora communities in the United States on how to engage with their representative, how to engage with the government, and share as private citizens.
Well, could you give us or point us to some concrete major achievements of your organization concerning
Certainly.
the Christian advocacy in the Middle East?
Certainly. There have been several resolutions through the years. Resolutions are certainly achievements, but they don't really have the power of law. Resolutions in Congress are basically congressional statements saying we, as a congressional body, we come together to express our strong feelings on a particular issue and state their position. Resolutions are very strong when it comes to persuading the White House, the President of the United States, on what their expressed intention is as Congress to pressure the President, to persuade the President, that sort of thing. But they don't have the power of law per se. But in addition to these several resolutions that we've helped pass, and I'm happy to speak to them individually as well, we've also passed a number of laws, statutes. For example, the first one I already mentioned early on in the introduction, in 2014 and 2015, where the United States government did not recognize the atrocities committed by ISIS as a genocide, which was inhibiting U.S. involvement, humanitarian involvement, as well as military involvement. It was through the passage of the law backed by IDC that the U.S. government first acknowledged it and recognized it officially as a genocide. That's one. That was the very first one. Subsequent to that, in 2019, October 2019, and then again in December of 2019, the House of Representatives, and then followed by the U.S. Senate, recognized what the resolution called, or what the law called, the Armenian genocide. Now, that genocide, as we know here today, was the genocide of the Syriac-Assyrian people as well. Not just the Armenians, but also the Greeks, the Pontic Greeks as well. Unfortunately, fortunately was passed. That's the greatest achievement. But the title that was able to pass was the Armenian Genocide Bill. But in the text, when read past the title, it lists all of our people and all of their names in the text of the law. So that was passed. We are very proud of that accomplishment. And then in 2021, on April 24th, which is a symbolic date, of course, that's the Armenian Genocide Commemoration Day, April 24th, 2021, former President Joe Biden, for the first time for any U.S. president, recognized the genocide against our people by the Ottoman Turks. So in 2019, the U.S. Congress recognized it, and then in 2021, the U.S. President for the first time recognized it.
Mhm.
And then along the way, since 2021, we've achieved a number of laws passed in Congress, signed by the President, many of which placed and increased and strengthened policy and sanctions against Iran, particularly Iran's involvement through its proxy actors, so Hezbollah in Lebanon, who are of course a thorn in the side and a great threat to the Christians in Lebanon. Iran's proxy actors in Iraq, specifically those who threaten our people in northern Iraq, of course, through local proxies, one of whom is a person named Rayan al-Kildani, who is Christian in name, Chaldean in name, but of course is an actor, is an agent of Iran. So that's another thing we've done, strong advocacy against Iran. In addition to that, several statements in congressional resolutions restating and reinforcing support for the Christians of northern Iraq. So this is just a few examples of some of the things IDC has been able to achieve in the last 11 years.
Very good. So recently, of course, and that was the trigger, I think, for our conversation. Of course, we had contact before, but an article of yours appeared on the outlet The Hill, which is a very well-known platform in the US. And it was about the deadly attack on Syria's community, the massacre. And I liked how you described it as compared it to the massacres of 1860 in that time. Let me pull that before we go on. Here we go. Here it is. So maybe you can give us first a summary, and then we will discuss the demands that you formulated in the article.
Certainly. Well, this article was an attempt to do a few things. First and foremost, again, before we do anything in terms of policy or advocacy, we need to educate, because while our people, excuse me, I should say, while the U.S. people, the U.S. population, and even the European, the West population in the West, even Christians in the West, aren't familiar with our people, aren't familiar with their plight, and aren't familiar with the existential nature of the situation. They're not fully aware of the gravity and the seriousness. So my first attempt, of course, was to educate who we are, what's our history, why it matters, and what's the nature of the threat today. So I did so essentially. I started off with discussion of the attack against the church in Damascus on the 22nd of June. Although, as you'll read the article, you realize that's not actually the focus of the article per se, although it's an important example of the phenomenon that I describe. The focus of the article, of course, is the fact that Christians in Syria, certainly the greater Middle East, but in this case, specifically Syria, are facing an existential crisis that has been ignored certainly for 1,500 years, if not 2,000 years, or at least since the West has been prominent and able to be an effective actor in the world. So that's what I sought to do in this article. I laid out that prior to the Syrian civil war in 2011, Christians made up nearly 10% of the Syrian population, which is, for any Middle Eastern country, for any Muslim majority country, is actually quite a, relatively speaking, a large portion of the population. But since in the last 14
10%
years,
of 22 million.
that's correct.
Yeah.
So it's quite a large portion of any Muslim majority nation. But since then, it's plummeted drastically you hear numbers, 300,000 is a common number you hear, but really nobody knows, and anybody's estimate is probably just as close as anybody else. But really, if this trend continues, what we've seen, if this trajectory continues, our people did not do great under the Assad family, the former president and his father. However, our people suffered for different reasons under the Assad regime. They were persecuted as a cultural entity, as a national entity, of course, obviously, as a linguistic entity, for those reasons. But as a religious minority or as a religious component, they were given their space to worship and to keep their faith and that sort of thing. Now, I'm not saying that is sufficient, because for a person or a community or a nation to be healthy, they must be given rights on a spiritual level, religious level, as well as a peoplehood level. And we were denied the peoplehood part and granted the religious part. So that was under the Assad regime. Currently, under the new transitional government, it's exactly the opposite. We don't know exactly what kind of ethnic or national or linguistic rights. That remains to be seen. But we are threatened and in great fear as a religious community. So it's a very different situation. One thing I will say and give credence to is the fact that we are all very, very surprised. Both Western governments, as well as the diaspora ourselves, as well as people in Syria, are quite surprised by the so far relatively conciliatory nature and approach that the new government has taken. Again, I don't want to get too enthusiastic or put my hopes too heavily on them, but thus far they're not without sins. Of course, they have a terrible history, and they've been responsible for many atrocities even in present day. But for all the good things we've seen come out of this transitional government, I take them with a grain of salt, because in my opinion, and I'm just one person, I see them as positioning themselves to secure themselves as a legitimate government, to gain the trust of the West. And once they find themselves in a secure place, we may see the mask come off and different colors emerge. That's my fear.
Before we come to the demands, I want to point, at least from my perspective, to a discrepancy between the Western view on the Christians of Syria, subsume or to put them all together in one basket as a Christian, as a group, but they are not so coherent in the country, and they are even not visible as such. So how do you cope with this discrepancy?
Could you repeat that? You broke up a minute there. I'm sorry.
I said the Christians in Syria and this is true also for Iraq, of course, they are viewed from outside as a Christian group, as if they
Yeah.
were homogeneous group, but they are not.
Yeah.
And they are even not articulating themselves as a group. And this is maybe part of the dilemma. How do you cope with this problem as a
Yeah.
advocacy group?
Yeah, it's a catch-22. I often, if you follow my writings and my work and our what we release, I often make distinction. Of course, I speak to the plight as the plight of Christians because it's a plight shared by all Christians alike. But I always make it a point, as a member of the Syriac Assyrian community myself, I always make it a point to intentionally distinguish between the groups because not that there's any animosity, of course, but it enriches them to show the textures and to show the distinguishing factors and the histories that are unique to each community. So I always make it a point to do that. In this case here, I mention the Christians of Syria as in some place I mention them as a monolith, but in other places I take the time to show why their uniqueness matters. I mention, the history, the Syriac history, not just the Syrian history of the Christians of the Syrian Arab Republic, but the fact that Christians, especially the Syriac Christians, go back thousands of years before the Syrian Arab Republic, of course, and even before Christ, before Christianization of this people. So I make it a point to draw that distinction whenever I write.
Okay. So let's come to the demands that you formulated, and they are actually at the addressee is the US. So could we go through that? So basically, you establish measured diplomatic relations. Diplomatic recognition should be leveraged to compel concrete commitments for reform and representative governance under the law. Then require security guarantees or constitutional protection. Then cultural preservation. So in order to urge the Syrian transitional government, I mean, none of this is momentarily happening. So those demands are just aired into nowhere. So
Exactly.
sorry to say that, but that's my
Yeah, no, no.
feeling.
You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. And this is why we need to advocate for them because if you scroll to the top, demand number one, I can speak to them each in turn.
Mhm.
So establish measured diplomatic relations. So thus far, what we've seen from the Trump administration, and I'm happy to be critical of the Trump administration when it's appropriate. I mean, and generally speaking, I voted for him 3 times. Generally speaking, I agree with much of what he does in terms of domestic matters and so forth. But there's a lot to be criticized and called for in this case. He's been very eager since the fall of the Assad regime. He's been very eager to normalize diplomatic relations with the new transitional government in Syria. Um,
And he has done
because
so
Trump,
in Saudi Arabia. He met with Al Shara.
exactly. He met with him, which is unprecedented because this is a man who was on the foreign terrorist list in the United States. This is a man who killed hundreds, possibly thousands of American soldiers in Iraq back when he was involved with Al Qaeda. So, given his history, it's unprecedented. Now, the reason I believe President Trump is so eager to normalize relations with the Syrian transitional government is to bolster his personal foreign policy resume. Because if Trump, I mean, we know Trump, I like him in some things and I'm critical of other things. One thing we can say about Trump is he's motivated by ego. He's motivated by recognition and accomplishments and so forth. Now, if he is able to normalize relations with Syria, and if he is able to normalize relations between Syria and Israel, right? Unprecedented, to bring Syria into the Abraham Accords, this would be a huge feather in the president's cap. In other words, this is going to be a huge accomplishment for his ego. So this is my reading of his foreign policy approach. Now, the reason I put in number one, establish measured diplomatic relations, is because yes, if we're going to establish diplomatic relations, which is not, I don't think, a bad thing, because if we don't establish relations with the current government, then there could be a vacuum. And who could fill that vacuum? Maybe ISIS, if they were able to reconstitute. So there are various potential trajectories that you want to consider. So, if we want to consider normalizing relations with the Syrian transitional government, it needs to be done in a way that has conditions, that has guardrails, that has expectations. We can't do it with no conditions attached. So, if they are able to demonstrate that they are honoring human rights, equal citizenship between all Christians, that the Christians are not considered dhimmi, second, third citizens, third-class citizens, things like this, then let's proceed with diplomatic relations. But the moment we see otherwise, then we need to consider backing off and possibly even reverting back. So, diplomatic relations with conditions. Number two is requiring security guarantees. This cannot happen. What we had witnessed happening in the church in June of this year, the attack, because as a government, as a legitimate government, you must be in control of your country, of your people, especially in this case when the group that claimed credit for the attack is a splinter group of HTS.
True.
So for them to say our hands are clean, we didn't do it. It was ISIS, it was them, it was whoever.
Was
That doesn't cut it.
Tahrir al-Sham is a split group, yeah.
Tahrir al-Sham is the original group, and the group that committed the bombing on the church in June was a splinter group of Tahrir al-Sham. Their name escapes me. Ansar al-Sunnah, I believe. So in this case, the transitional government cannot, say I have nothing to do with it. It's not me, it was them. Because at the end of the day, we say in the United States in English, the buck stops with the government. Whatever happens, the responsibility ultimately falls with the government. So they need to supply security guarantees showing that they will prosecute, they will enforce the law, they will hold terrorists accountable, and acts of terrorism will not be tolerated, and even provide security, military security at churches, among Christian communities and neighborhoods, and so forth. So that's number two. Number three is we must require constitutional protections. And I spoke about it just a moment ago. So equal citizenship is necessary. This cannot be the Syria of Bashar al-Assad. This cannot be Saudi Arabia. This cannot be Qatar. This cannot be even Turkey for argument's sake. This must be a Syria that is found under rule of law, not Sharia law, because as you saw in recent months, the government announced, the ministers announced that it won't be Sharia law, but it'll be law inspired by Sharia. Well, that's the same thing. That's just tricky language to say the same thing. The Constitution must be written in a way where Christians, just like any other minority group, would have the ability and opportunity to run for political office, including the presidency. Now, they don't have to worry. The government or the Sunni majority doesn't have to worry because a Christian will never be elected president of Syria. This is obvious. But it must be in the Constitution that all citizens are held to equal citizenship. This is number three. Number four, urge the transitional government to take part in initiatives for cultural preservation. Syria, as you know, is rich with cultural heritage, both tangible heritage and intangible heritage. Tangible heritage are the ruins, the sites, documents, manuscripts, of course. And then intangible heritage is us. We are intangible heritage. Our language is intangible heritage. Our history, our stories, the names of our cities and towns, our heritage that must be preserved. So this is another condition that must be enforced upon the transitional government. And then finally, of course, is the most, I guess, practical and the most immediately necessary is the delivery of humanitarian aid. But of course, there must be guidelines and a structured method to doing this. It can't be just sent to anywhere. It must be sent to vetted communities, vetted organizations, NGOs, religious organizations for the benefit of the people on the ground. So these are the five recommendations, and I know they're not exhaustive, but I think they're somewhat inclusive.
I would sign for all five. So my critical comment was, what mechanisms are in place in order to urge, as you write, or to enforce these conditions? We have no mechanism in place. There are only appeals currently. At the parallel, I mean, it was very good to lift the sanctions, definitely from humanitarian perspective. This government is becoming already, there was a Syria support fund gathering in Brussels, I think a couple months ago. They collected about 5 billion. We hear about investments from the Arabic countries in the country. So this government is becoming everything what it needs, but there is no mechanism to enforce part of the demands that you have formulated.
Absolutely correct. Yes, there's no formal mechanism. There's no official structured mechanism, and that's essentially what makes politics politics. It's an interesting thing to navigate. So, as you mentioned, the lifting of sanctions was a good thing so long as it doesn't benefit bad actors, right? It alleviates suffering of the people. Well, it was not just IDC, but including IDC and many other advocacy organizations here in the United States, Syrian advocacy, even Muslim advocacy organizations, who urged the U.S. government to lift sanctions, and that's ultimately what happened. It's done through a number of informal mechanisms. It's pressure on Congress, it's lobbying Congress, individual members, as well as bodies, committees, caucuses. And it's also putting pressure on the State Department and the White House. None of these actions alone is sufficient. All of them are necessary because the president can do whatever he wants. Let's state the fact. He is in charge of foreign policy in terms of the U.S. Constitution. However, in the U.S. politics, in order to get domestic policy passed, the United States president is interested in what Congress wants, because if he wants them to vote in his favor on a domestic matter, then he will listen to him on foreign policy matters. And so this is where the important, interaction happens. So that's exactly what we do. And thus far, on some matters, it's been successful, on others, it has not been successful. So our approach for these 5 recommendations that we just went through is to hit Congress hard, explain to them why they matter, why they're important, and why we cannot give carte blanche to this new government. We must hold them to conditions, and that's what we've been doing. And for the next indefinite period of time, that's exactly what we'll do.
That's true. As we see, just open doors, I think a couple of days ago. Let me share that. Yeah, it is. It said basically 3 weeks after the bombing in Damascus, another Syrian church narrowly escaped a similar attack. 3 people were arrested after being discovered with explosive close to a church in Kharibat village near Tartus in West Syria. Yeah. And just as today, and I will be sharing this one as well. Here. Can you see that? Syria, new wave of violence. And this is just from today from Church in Need. So it's the issue is continuing. So Damascus bombing was not, let me say, a singular event. Yeah.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's one of many, and this is what's driving the Christians to the brink of extinction in Syria. You mentioned the attack, or the attempted attack in Tartus, outside Tartus. There was also ongoing to this day, currently, the last few days, in Soweida, against not just the Druze community, but also the Christians. And there are Christians who live in the south of Syria, in Soweida district. So yes, this is happening everywhere. This is happening in the capital as well as in the countryside. So
actually, there was some news on Mosul. I think it was or Homs. In Homs, jihadists went into a shop of a goldsmith, a Christian goldsmith, and demanded jizya, and he refused to pay. So they killed him. So it's basically on a daily basis where you can now follow what's going on. And this brings me actually to what Christian leaders back in time, during the Assad time, were trying to avoid the horrible situation they were witnessing in Iraq. I have myself present at the Munich Security Conference panels, where heads of our churches, among them Morafrem of Syriac Orthodox Church, then Louis Sacco, Syrian Catholic Patriarch, and others were invited. They were always pointing to the Iraq. And now it seems that the situation is developing along the same axis of fragmentation, sectarian militia, and terror against minorities, particularly Christians. So the church bombing in Damascus had its equivalent in Baghdad 2010, where in October 31st, more than 50 people were killed. So how do you see these parallels?
The parallels are unmistakable. Um, and it's something that, as you mentioned, the Christian leaders, the patriarchs, always dreaded. What's something the people have also dreaded. It's something that we in the diaspora have also dreaded. Although we're distant and we're safe, it's something that we've always seen coming on the horizon. Look, one thing I always try to bring up and to put it into historical perspective is the fact that throughout history, our people, Christians in general in the Middle East, but specifically our people also, have always been caught between a rock and a hard place. We've always been caught between warring factions, larger, more powerful factions. We've never been a party to any of the wars, any of the conflicts, but we've always paid the largest price and the most damaging price. Whether it was Rome versus Persia, whether it's Turks versus Kurds, whether it's Sunni Shia, whether it's Israel versus Arab, whether it's pan-Arabist government like the Assad government versus Islamist government like HTS. We've always been in the middle. We've never been an interested party, but we've always been the ones to pay most dearly. This is the story of our history. We've never been in a position to write our own history. We've always had our history written for us. And what we see happening today in Iraq over the last 20 years, and then today over the last 6 months to a year in Syria, is exactly a continuation of this history, and it does not look grim. Part of the article that I just published last week that we discussed just a moment ago, it was an informational article. It was an article that makes policy demands and recommendations. But if you read it closely, the sad thing about it is that article read like a eulogy. A eulogy is in a funeral when somebody stands and reads about the person's life and they were a good person and we will miss him and so on and so forth. That article read just as if it were a eulogy for Christians in Syria. And this fact is not lost on me. This fact is pretty apparent to most people. And the work that we do at IDC is not pleasant work. It's not promising work. Sometimes it often is very discouraging work, but it's work that has to be done uh, to the extent that it can. And we never lose hope that what we do will bring some kind of positive effect, although the tide is much more ferocious sometimes than our work is.
I'm glad you touched on Iraq. So what has RDC done specifically for the Christian in Iraq? Because
Well,
the Christians are facing really complex issues over there. The first and most important political issue is the issue of the Christian quota, the seats stolen basically by Kurds and Shia or Arabs in general.
yeah.
Then we have the land grabbing continuing. The Assyrian communities in Iraq face significant issues regarding property and land rights, including land grabbing,
Mhm.
displacement, particularly in the Kurdistan region, where the region is hailed as a safe haven for the Christians. So
Yeah.
how do you see that?
It's unfortunate because there's no angle from which you can expect to win. The central government is infiltrated by Iran. Excuse me. The Ninwa Plain is infiltrated by Iran. The KRG in the north, as you mentioned, is not without sins. Although they have nominal protections there, they have nominal stability there. There is no pure actor in this equation, which is exactly why this makes the Iraq situation more complex than the Syria situation. The Syria situation arguably is more lethal. In the short term, it may be more lethal, but the Syria situation is certainly more complex, and in the long term, just as damaging. With regard to our people in the north, let's say in the Kurdistan region, in Ankawa, Erbil, um, we've heard many reports of, as you mentioned, political disenfranchisement, political business and trade disenfranchisement, and the like, land grabbing, and so forth.
I
Um,
have
uh,
here actually a list that I would like to share.
Yes.
which lists, I think, almost 100 cases. Yeah, it says
Yep.
94 cases showing land grab, and it's by name, location, and
Yep.
who is sizing this. Basically, people from neighboring villages, former
Yep.
regime. Then there are some municipality of Zaho, so basically formal government organizations, and so on and so on. And nothing is happening in this direction. Nobody is putting
Yep.
pressure on the KDP, basically, which is the major party in the north.
Correct. Yes. Uh, I met with last year, I would say, I believe it was last year. We actually met with the U.S., excuse me, the KRG representation in Washington, D.C. They have, it's not an embassy, it's a mission that they have in D.C. We met with them and we brought up this among other issues of certainly the land grabbing issue. And their response to us was, well, it's not the KRG, it's individuals, it's villagers, it's so on and so forth, individual actors. My response was, be that as it may, and I don't have confirmation that it's not the government, that it's in fact just villagers, individuals, but be that as it may, assuming what you're saying is correct, what is the government doing about it? What's the government doing to enforce property law? Is there property law? What is the system for honoring deeds and documentation that may be older than the formation of the KRG? Because the KRG is not old. It's a relatively new political entity. So what is your record keeping? Do you have legacy records? And how is that honored? How can the land, the privately owned land of individual members of a minority community, of a threatened minority community, be honored within the framework and apparatus of your government? And we didn't receive an answer, although this is something we are continually interested in and ask about. I mean, again, right now, that almost is, I hate to say, not a primary issue for us, but it's still an issue we're interested in. It's still an issue we ask about and hope to pursue.
Actually, that list that I have shown, it's submitted by the member of KRG Parliament, Farid, I think, Yako, from the Assyrian movement. So it's very official, and I will be happy to establish contact to you that you can directly talk to the member of parliament in the north. So
What's his name?
quite
I
official.
believe I have a relationship with him. What's his name?
Yako.
Yes, yes. I
Yeah.
believe we've had contact. I've had a number of contacts with members of parliament, specifically those from Zawa party.
Mhm.
I'm not. The name doesn't ring a bell to me, so I'd be happy to be put in touch with him.
No problem.
Yeah.
You mentioned, of course, Kaldani and on the Shia group affiliation
Yep.
and the problems that resulting from his relation with Patriarch Sacco, but also on federal level, we have the issue of quota and basically stealing the quota from the Assyrians or Christian group in general. And I am certain US has maybe still influence also on Baghdad that can maybe put pressure in order to solve the issue. But similarly also on the KRG side, and this is also not solved. And it's repeating from election to election, it's getting worse.
Exactly. This is the quandary that the U.S. government finds itself in. They befriend too many entities on competing sides, and they don't know how to proceed. We see this happening in Syria the same way. Again, against the central government and the Kurds in the northeast, as you see happening, as you described in Iraq. It's the same thing. The United States places itself on different sides of the issue, and then it comes to a head, and they're not sure which way to go. But in the end, it's our people that pay the greatest price. So yeah, there's been serious offenses against our people, particularly with regard to the parliamentary quota, and we've educated members of Congress on this, but they are of course slow to move, specifically because of the political dynamic. I hate to say we are a small organization, so right now we've been stretched thin. But rather than being stretched too thin, we've focused chiefly on Syria and Iraq. Almost right now, I hate to say, is a peripheral issue, but we hope to continue our work in that area as well.
Interesting. We come back to Syria and SDF and the Kurdish self-government region. And in the past, as I could follow IDC's activities, I think you gave them also some visibility on panels and so on, maybe too much, and ignored a little bit the position of the Syrian Democratic Organization, which was all in the opposition group. UN acknowledged the opposition group, but I think maybe it didn't get the visibility that it was due for them. But
Yep.
recently, on March 10, 25, Mazlum Abdi, commander of the Syrian Democratic Forces, and the Syrian interim president, Ahmed al-Shara, signed a deal to integrate the SDF into the Syrian state. And that was also a demand, I think, from even President Trump and many others. So this agreement, facilitated even by the US-backed negotiation, aimed to integrate the SDF, a Kurdish-led group, into the new Syrian army and civil institutions. Interestingly, key aspects of the agreement, as SDF was always portrayed as a multi-ethnic group, the key aspects of the agreement doesn't or mention only Kurds and nobody else. And I
Yeah.
am going through that integration. The SDF is to be integrated into the Syrian state's military and civil institution. Recognition of the Kurds, underlined. The agreement recognizes the Kurdish population as an indigenous community of Syria and citizen and right. It guarantees citizenship and constitutional right for the Kurds and so on. No mentioning of other group. So
Yeah.
what was then SDF? Why it was then portrayed as a holy grail of democracy?
Yeah, clearly they've partitioned their policy and their positions when it suits. When it suits their purposes, of course, they show themselves as a multi-ethnic entity, and of course, when it comes to actual recognition, it's Kurdish and only Kurdish. For a long time, you mentioned IDCs. Well, let me first say we never supported or lobbied, or advocated on behalf of or for, and really any purposely favorable like the SDF. Our support has always been for the welfare of our people in the whole of Syria, and in this case, northeast Syria. And of course, our people fall on both sides of the issue with regard to the SDF. At the time, during the civil war prior to HTS, prior to the fall of the Assad government, the heat of the civil war, ISIS, the Northeast provided some measure of stability for the survival of our people, protection of our people against Turkey, against ISIS, against the various bad actors in the region. Obviously, they were not without sins. They're not the perfect entity to represent our people. In fact, there really no sufficient entity that can represent our people but ourselves. That's the fact. But that's the reason for sort of at times maybe you could call it complementary expression for the SDF at the time because they did provide stability, and that's pretty much that was pretty much our approach. Right now, the formula is completely different. Right now, the dynamics are different, where they struck this agreement March 10th. The agreement was not defined. It was sort of like the structure, the framework of an agreement. It remains to be seen how it's going to work out between the SDF proper and the Syrian government, what the integration is going to look like, what the terms are going to be. But more importantly to us, why it matters for us is what's going to be the place, if not the role, but the place for our people in that new structure. They seem to have some nominal representation in the Northeast autonomous governance structure. Was it perfect? No, but it remains to be seen how that will play out and translate in the future Syria. We hope for the best, but we will never stop calling out and invoking the name of our people in any conversation here in the United States. Because it matters. Because right now, as I said, foreign policy right now is divided between Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, and Syria. That's U.S. foreign policy right now. So the U.S. is very interested in it, and we're ready to advise and educate whenever called upon, and even when not called upon.
Very good. So maybe we should give some opportunity, and I am not following Facebook. Maybe Adnan, if there are questions from Facebook streaming or from two friends that are here attending, Professor Mikhail Abdallah and Abu Zaytoun, if there are questions, we are happy to take them.
No, I see no question now.
Alfona Mikhail?
Alfona Mikhail. Unida skhira yo.
Yeah.
La problem with internet.
Abud, any comment or any question?
Yes, I would like to ask Richard, how do you see the cooperation of the several organizations, parties we have, and churches also? How is your evaluation? Do they work good together, or is there separation, or they work against together? What is your evaluation on this case?
Of course, I wish there was more unity. Not only in some instances, of course, you see organizations and churches working against each other. Putting those situations aside, those are rare, but they exist. I wish we saw more unity in terms of pooling our talent, pooling our effort toward the same goal. Because at the end of the day, we really do have the same goal, and that is the survival of our people and our heritage, our culture, our legacy. But of course, they have different means, methods, and ideologies on how to accomplish this. I don't have all the answers on how we can achieve this. For me, myself, my approach is to do it in a very conciliatory way. And I wanted to first, I didn't get a chance to say it at the very beginning. This Unity Forum is a perfect example. It's a perfect paradigm for doing exactly this, because you talk to issues and not controversies. So if all of our community, our organizations, including the church, could take on this approach, it would be a wonderful thing. In recent years, we've seen, in northeast Syria, we've seen the Syriac Union Party, the so-called Davronoye, and Takasto, the Assyrian Democratic Organization, come together in a very positive and productive way. This also is a very encouraging example of this. We need to see more of this, also among the church. Of course, I understand there's some fear within the church. There's some fear of political involvement. There's some fear of national work as opposed to religious work. And there are ways to manage those issues and manage those threats without inhibiting cooperation. And I hope to see that. And I think that issue alone, Miaqlo Abud, is a wonderful, wonderful topic to dedicate a whole Unity Forum program on discussing exactly this.
Let's assume they are united, all the parties and organizations and churches and so on. What is, from your point of view, the maximum demand they can ask for? I think you are in the US, from the US government. What was this, from your point of view, the maximum demand?
Demand that they can ask from who?
From the officials in Washington, D.C., for example.
Well, see, okay, this is a wonderful question, and this is a question I've been wrestling with for several years. We know what our demands are. We know what's reasonable, because frankly, anything is reasonable as long as you have something to back it up. And what I mean by this, as follows. When I advocate alongside the Armenians, the Greeks, the Jews, in Washington you have everybody, but I'll talk about the Armenians specifically, or the Greeks. When they make a demand in the U.S. government, whether it's in Congress or the State Department or the White House, that representative, that lobbyist, that advocate looks behind him and he sees thousands of people. When myself, or anybody like me, a fellow Syriac Assyrian, is in Washington and he makes a demand, he looks behind him, he sees nobody. This has been my issue for several years. So to answer your question, the sky is the limit in terms of the demands. We can say we are a people, we need our national rights, we need our ethnic rights, we need our civil rights. There's no limit on what we can ask for, but we need to have something to back it up. We need to show the US government or any Western government why it matters, who we are. The Armenians or the Jews or the whoever, they've done a fantastic job of packaging their story of who they are. We don't. This goes back to your question about conflict within the community. This one's Aramean, this one's Assyrian, this one's I don't know what. This is the problem. Now, we can all have our opinions on the name question. I don't mean to take it to that issue. That's an unimportant issue. But the point is, we need some kind of continuity of story, unity of message, and we don't have that. And that's why I really admire, I don't want to say I envy, but I really admire the Armenians, the Jews, the whoever else, because I work with them every day, and I see something they have that we don't have. So if we can get it together, if we can make our story united, then the sky's the limit.
You said that we know what we want, what we demand, but are you sure about that? That every group know what they want?
Every individual knows what he wants.
Yes, because as I can see, sorry, Mesih, as I can see, there is a collision of demands of targets from the different sides of our community, from the churches, from the parties, organizations, and political parties. So this is the problem we face also in Europe, that the one group goes to parliament and demand goal 1, the other one goal 2, and at the end there is no common target.
Yeah, exactly. We come with separate messages, but not only we come under separate banners. We come under different names, and it just causes confusion. It causes it discredits our message. Yeah.
Maybe this brings me to a suggestion. First of all, actually, this Unity Forum was the first to bring together for an interview the head of the Syriac Union in Syria and the Syrian Democratic Organization. So we did the first interview a couple of years back. And so on, and we are following, of course, on this path. But this generally, Abud's question brings me to a suggestion where IDC probably could be the platform to urgently organize a panel with all church leaders, bring them together, bring them to the US, and among them also some political civil organizations or personalities who are active in public about the situation in Syria. So probably in Syria, there are now all church leaders maybe going a little bit on silence. I am saying this because we have seen that on the ceremony after the church bombing, there was a ceremony in Damascus, and the patriarch of the Church of Syriac Orthodox Church was a little bit missing, of course, there. We don't know why. Maybe he was not in the country. Maybe he was outside. I have no idea. But I think IDC could take the initiative really to bring church leaders together to discuss the situation and formulate common demands from a Christian group that IDC is let me say, promoting or advocating for. And in addition, as I said, some civil and political organization. What do you think about this? Is this realistic?
I think it's realistic. I think it's a wonderful idea. It's something I've been thinking about and talking about internally for some time. It's important. The challenge we need to navigate before we can make such an opportunity possible is, of course, to get the buy-in from all church leaders and to be affiliated or at least associated with a Western organization, an American organization specifically like IDC. That's sometimes the challenge. That's been our challenge from day one. But we often take these opportunities when they are within the realm of possibility. So I think it's a wonderful idea. I'd be happy to work with this forum here, you and the others on this call, but also, of course, specifically with the leadership of the churches and Takasto and the Syriac Union Party and so forth. I think it's wonderful. I think it's long overdue. Yeah, but my question is, as excellent as this idea is, and as obvious as it's not just an excellent idea, it's an obvious idea. Why hasn't it happened? not even as an American diaspora organization facilitating it, but why hasn't it happened in Syria? Why haven't the room in the Syriac Catholic and the Syriac Orthodox and in Takasto and SUP, why haven't they come together thus far? I mean, to me, that seems like the most obvious next action to bring themselves together to formalize an official unified position. It confuses me and confounds me why this hasn't happened yet. But if it takes a Western organization to do it, so long as we're able, I'd be happy to lead that.
I think church leader may become more trust in such an initiative if it's, let me say, put under the umbrella of the Congress or Senate, U.S. Senate, or a couple of the senators and so on, and they invite basically, and along with the IDC and maybe other advocacy organizations that you are partnering with. It's idea. I think about it, and we can have remain in touch about this, of course.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. It could work both ways. Affiliating this conference with the U.S. government or U.S. Congress or under the banner of Congress could urge them to participate, or it could scare them away from participation for affiliation. But I look forward to continuing that conversation and hopefully bringing something together.
Okay. So, Rich, we are approaching 1 hour time, and I know your time schedule is very limited. So, I would like to give you the opportunity at the end to talk about the future perspective from a current situation. How can it develop, and how do you see the Christians, let me say, in the midterm? Are they all now leaving Syria because it's some sort of a panic and everybody is sitting on his luggage or her luggage to leave the country, or is there a hope? How do you see that?
Well, I wish I could deliver good news, but unfortunately, it's a very grim situation. The only people of ours who have not left Syria is not because they don't want to; it's because they haven't had the means in many cases. If they're given the means, if they're given the access, they will leave. This is the simple truth. For those who are still there, we are fighting for them in the diaspora. I know you and our brothers in Europe are doing the same. We can continue to pray. This is what we always hear. We must continue to pray, but I think it's important to also work. There's the saying, pray like it's all up to God, but work like it's all up to you. And we have to do both. So as I said, the article was not a promising article that I published. It read more like a eulogy than a plan of action. I wish I had better news. I mean, I can't leave it with a happy ending. But we can't stop. We have to continue because we're blessed to be in the diaspora. We're blessed to have the means and the opportunity and the financial access. So this is what we'll continue to do.
Thank you, Richard Ghazal. Thank you for accepting our invitation to join our Unity Forum. And we hope it's not the last time that we will talk about the issue. And I wish you a happy day. And Ram Shobricho und Fushun Bashlomo.
Ram Shobricho Taudi Ghalebe, Fsihno Ghalebe, Tawino Amecho, Fushu Bashlomo.
Yeah, Psheno.